Hello, this case is about Biobot analytics. In 2017, Nusha Gailey and Mariana Matus were deciding whether to leave their labs at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, put other job opportunities aside, and dive full-time into founding a wastewater analysis startup, Biobot. Gailey, an architect, and Matus, a computational biologist, had been turning sewage into information about population health, and now had dreams of turning the data encoded in urine and stool into a viable and impactful business. The core idea for Biobot was an outgrowth of an MIT project called Underworlds, on which the two collaborated. The MIT professors who spearheaded Underworlds enlisted Gailey and Matus to develop new methods for extracting health information from sewage. Communities could learn so much by sensing what was in people's gut, but most of that information was flushed away. Any sewage testing typically happened at treatment plants miles from its source, at which point biomarkers had degraded and other runoff had been mixed in. 2 years of early Underworlds experiments had proven promising. Matus and Gailey thought they could take what they'd learned from Underworlds and make a business out of human waste analysis, but not everyone around them agreed. The pair envisioned giant markets, everybody pees and poops, they noted, and customer bases among governments, but also hedge funds, pharmaceutical firms, and insurance providers. If they embarked on the startup in earnest, they intended to start by helping cities track consumption of addictive opioids. However, many people they heard from thought they shouldn't begin with opioids or right now at all. Getting access to wastewater could prove challenging, let alone selling their vision to governments with tight budgets and burdensome purchasing processes. And even if they were able to sell their idea to buyers, it was unclear whether they would have intellectual property to protect the work they had put in. If Gailey pursued Biobot, it would mean foregoing an opportunity to work for her dream employer, a new urban tech company spun out of Alphabet. Matus, who was finishing her PhD, would be abandoning a promising academic trajectory. They had been advised to choose other startups instead, and knew as immigrants on temporary visas, if they failed at this venture, they might even have to leave the country. With careers and more in the balance, Gailey and Matus had to decide whether their pipe dream was worth pursuing now. Our learning objectives are to explore the origins of new venture ideas. These ideas often are born from informational advantages. These may take the form of prior knowledge, specialized skills, idiosyncratic networks, biography, and can be intentional or unintentional. Also, to develop a set of criteria for evaluating whether an idea or technology can make for a good startup opportunity. Such criteria may require a formal theory for why such a venture does not yet exist, or under what circumstances the venture would fail. Finally, to learn how to calculate total addressable market and understand for what purposes it is and is not a useful metric. Here are some key concepts and themes in this case. First, sources of venture ideas. What makes for a good new venture idea? This is the billion-dollar question, literally. Contrary to the image of the lone genius investor, much of the entrepreneurship literature points to the importance of location and timing in finding valuable entrepreneurial ideas. Intelligence, creativity, and technical skill are valuable in many pursuits, but are only relevant for venture creation if the individuals in possession of those qualities have exposure to unique opportunities, as well as the necessary supporting institutions. Exposure may be a function of birthplace and personal history, or choices to position oneself in information corridors that are conducive to innovation. Geographic and historical location plays an outsized role in whether entrepreneurs emerge within a society. Baumol, 1990, studies how the norms and constraints of the economic environment funnel individuals with creative instincts into different roles. In medieval China, for example, the greatest wealth and prestige was reserved for those who climbed the ladder of the imperial bureaucracy, while warfare provided some of the best profit opportunities for risk-loving types in medieval Europe. Thus, those with merchant ambition channeled their energy into how to profit from within the imperial ranks or through economic conflict between barons, particularly relevant to potential scientist-turned-founders. Innovation hub cities are more fertile ground from translating academic science into commercial ventures. Recent work by Conti and Guzman shows that entrepreneurs who migrate to entrepreneurial hubs see better funding and acquisition outcomes. Clancy reviews a number of studies that show how entrepreneurship may be contagious, such that social contact with other entrepreneurs makes individuals more likely to pursue their own ventures. Furthermore, hot financing markets lead to not only more venture capital investment, but also more tail outcomes, great successes and failures alike. Thus, a first-order concern for would-be entrepreneurs is to locate themselves in corners of society where novel commercial ideas are highly valued. Clearly, the Biobot founders were operating in such an environment. However, one might argue that the extreme focus on startup culture at MIT during the moment of Biobot's founding might have encouraged too many half-baked ideas to leave the lab early in pursuit of venture funding. In contrast to the concentration of geographic clusters, entrepreneurial opportunities may emerge from individuals operating in unique information corridors. Specialized knowledge and experience allow individuals to spot commercial opportunities not visible to incumbent firms and non-specialists. In this view, often associated with the Austrian School of Economics, puts great weight on the spread of useful information across disparate domains. Shane shows that even within the narrow area of MIT-founded 3D printer companies, various founders pursued drastically different commercialization opportunities because of their unique backgrounds and access to information on entrepreneurial opportunities. Note that traditionally unappealing activities like sampling the contents of public sewers might be exactly the type of otherwise overlooked information corridor that would yield unique opportunities. While unique information corridors might shine light on novel venture ideas, exploring alongside like-minded innovators also might help push the frontier of an emerging technology. Such communities provide productive collaboration and competition. The presence of competitors also helps generate more information on technology performance and commercial potential. This opportunity to lead from competitors adds to the option value of R&D and may increase the attractiveness of investing in an unproven technology space. For the Biobot team, the research community surrounding wastewater epidemiology was indeed growing and provided useful examples and data points for Mathis and Gailey. See Wastewater Epidemiology section, case page 3 through 5. However, those peer initiatives were mainly academic or government run, so their applications might be less useful for commercial efforts. Finally, there is an academic debate about whether the best ideas for new innovations stem from serendipitous discovery and practitioner tinkering versus methodical, formal scientific study. While user innovation has certainly been an important source of technological progress, recent work by Watzinger, Krieger, and Schnitzer shows that patents that are closer to formal scientific publications are more valuable than patents in the same vintage and technology class that are totally disconnected with formal science. Patents closer to science also represent more novel, that is high risk, high reward, inventions. Mattis and Gailey, by attempting to commercialize insights gained through pure academic research, are building off a base of unique, cutting-edge information, but also at risk of finding no commercial utility, as do many science-based ventures. Another key concept is forming a theory of the venture. Regardless of the origin story for the entrepreneurial opportunity, founders need to develop a coherent theory of their venture. Over the past few decades, a number of academics and practitioners have proposed structured frameworks for developing and articulating business models. Many of these frameworks heavily emphasize Customer needs and hypothesis testing during action learning, which means that the person studying the framework resides in an actual practice-based setting. Most prominently, Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, popularized the fast cycle, test and iterate approach to startup formation. Core to this movement is the idea of putting a minimum viable product, or MVP, in front of real-world potential customers as soon as possible and using that feedback to adjust the product quickly until one achieves product market fit. Critiques of the action-oriented approach of the lean startup movement have recently inspired alternative frameworks for organizing business plans and choosing among alternative commercialization strategies. The proponents of these alternatives emphasize the importance of planning and analysis before embarking on an action plan of test and iterate. Scott Stern, Joshua Gans, Jane Wu, and Aaron Scott have developed a series of frameworks that start with the premise that a single initial startup idea comes with multiple paths for commercialization. The critical dimensions of these choices, they argue, are whether to collaborate versus compete with incumbents, and whether to prioritize product development or speed. Putting together elements of the experiment-focused lean startup approach and the more theoretical entrepreneurial approaches to entrepreneurial strategy, Phelan, Gambardella, and Zenger describe their Value Lab tool for connecting the contrarian or unique beliefs that underscore the potential firm's theory of value, the more scientific set of experiments needed to explore the opportunity. This case is written to help you rigorously evaluate early venture ideas. The goal is to help you decide whether an idea is worth pursuing, and if it is worth pursuing, which path you should take and what needs to be true for you to succeed. This can help guide initial customer decisions, including what to choose as the beachhead market. It can also help you as founder identify falsifiable hypotheses and determine how those hypotheses should be prioritized down the road. Phelan and Zenger emphasize the need for a unique, firm-specific point of view of the theory of the venture. They emphasize that a good theory requires a contrarian belief or idiosyncratic perspective and is both one, falsifiable, and two, generative. That is, founders need to know or believe something that others do not, and this knowledge should be testable and open up new possibilities. Consider a single deep question to help unspool these threads. Why hasn't this idea been done well before? Founders should dig into the reasons an idea may not have been done before and explore sub-questions about whether the answers to these questions suggest that Gailey and Mattis should push ahead with their idea or not. One emphasis is to develop a theory of the venture. All business model frameworks ask founders to articulate their hypotheses. One can summarize the key questions as follows. Why hasn't this idea been done well before? Possible reasons include no one understood the extent of the problem to be solved, the necessary technology was not available, no one had the key information, or some structural market failure, such as externalities, asymmetric information, regulatory roadblocks, etc. The second question is, what is our unique or contrarian belief? What does it tell us to look for in the world? A third possible question is, why now? What about this current time period makes the idea feasible? Fourth, why us? What gives the team a competitive advantage? And finally, what must be true? What must we learn to validate our answers to the other questions above? The answers to the above questions can lead to subsequent discussion leading to two important deliverables. First, articulate the business model. Formalize the key design choices, identify the biggest uncertainties, and build a roadmap for initial development and testing. Translating the theory of the firm to a fleshed out business model is a skill that can be honed through practice and by examining examples of other successful and failed ventures. Another deliverable is to test falsifiable hypotheses. Seek economical, fast, and valid experiments. We want measurement free of bias. When product prototyping and MVP style experiments are not easily performed, Consider what components of uncertainty might be resolved independently through information gathering or active experiments. Great entrepreneurs are also great experimental designers. Market sizing. One potential reason an idea may not have been pursued in the past is that the market for such an idea is too small. The case presents an opportunity to teach how early ventures calculate total addressable market. Understanding the mechanics of calculating TAM, as well as the limitations of TAM as an informative metric, is important to evaluating an initial venture opportunity and building a theory of the venture. Gupta describes two methods for calculating TAM. The first is a top-down approach, which involves identifying competitor businesses and using industry estimates to gauge the size of the market. For Biobot, this could involve estimating the market for wastewater testing, opioid tracking and prevention, or public health budgets more broadly, and determining a realistic share of that market they could eventually capture as revenue. One key teaching point around TAM is the interplay between the decisions made to calculate TAM and the development of a business model. By calculating TAM, entrepreneurs are forced to make concrete assumptions about the business, customers they will serve, and what it would take to achieve the revenue goals to make a business viable and to reach its potential. The second method is a bottom-up approach, which starts with the most granular unit of the customer, the number of them that may be interested in the product or service, and how much they will be willing to pay. An example of this calculation could look like the following. The U.S. population is approximately 300 million. 2/3 of the U.S. population is covered by wastewater infrastructure. You may test the wastewater at sites for every 10,000 individuals. Each customer municipality samples each site once per month, and each sample and test have some cost and revenue associated with it. Using these numbers from the case, you can produce a range of estimates depending on input choices. See Exhibit 2 for some examples. One way of conceptualizing TAM is to think of its goal as approximating two key parameters: the number of customers and the revenue per customer. Mike Vernal, a partner at Sequoia Capital, describes the market size formula as simply market size is equal to revenue per customer times the number of customers. He quotes another Sequoia partner, who often asks, "Two questions, please. What percent of the Fortune 2000 will ultimately buy this product? And how much will they be worth to you on average?" In this case, the analog may be, what percent of the largest cities in the world will ultimately purchase Biobot services, and how much will they be worth to you on average? TAM is useful as a way to force a concrete investigation of the revenue potential of the business. This is particularly useful given difficulties in valuing an early stage or pre-revenue business. In a survey of venture capitalists, Gompers, Gornal, Kaplan, and Strebulev report that they focus on finding companies that have the potential for large exits in lieu of focusing on near-term cash flows. TAM is not always employed usefully, so be aware of the ways in which it is thought about by venture capitalists and other investors. Y Combinator, for instance, advises startups to pitch a total available market greater than $1 billion if possible. They would also want to include the most persuasive evidence that this is real. There are non-rigorous and cynical ways to inflate TAM estimates for a startup pitch, and this may be the best strategy for presenting TAM to investors, but entrepreneurs should take an honest accounting of their TAM as they develop their business model. TAM has a number of additional shortcomings that may limit its usefulness for planning. TAM is not a measure of profitability, cash flows, or costs. Businesses with similar TAMs can have very different prospects along these dimensions that have implications for how much money they may need to raise and strategic decisions. Another limitation of TAM that is particularly applicable to Biobot is that for businesses focused on growing or nascent markets, existing estimates may not be a good prediction of the market's revenue potential in 5 or 10 years. For example, Biobot may create a new line in public health budgets for wastewater testing. TAM is helpful for identifying customers and understanding the revenue per customer required to achieve revenue targets, but it cannot replace a more thorough business model analysis, accounting for the go-to market strategy, technology and operations, and cash flow formula. Finally, TAM calculations do not typically include adjacent markets, nor incorporate the costs of reaching those adjacent markets. Thanks for watching.